Tonight, the Pope's specially appointed Commissioner for the Protection of Children speaks with Tara Brown, breaking his silence on George Pell.
I personally think that his position is untenable because he has now a catalogue of denials. He has a catalogue of denigrating people, of acting with callousness, cold-heartedness, almost sociopathic, I would go as far as to say. This lack of care.
Peter Saunders is talking about George Pell, Australia's most senior Catholic and one of the Pope's most trusted advisors.
George Pell says that he fully supports the Royal Commission, that he wants to do everything he can to help the Royal Commission, that he hasn't been asked to appear. Is that why he's not there?
I believe that man has, at the very least, a moral responsibility to fly straight back and to tell the Royal Commission everything he knows, in order to allay the fears that many victims and survivors feel, which is that he's avoiding facing some very, very difficult truths, which is his past behaviour.
What Peter Saunders says matters. 6 months ago, he was handpicked by Pope Francis to join the new Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors. The Commission is charged with establishing greater accountability and transparency within the Catholic Church on child sex abuse. It reports directly to the Pope.
Direction cannot include cover-ups and allowing children to be abused.
A victim of pedophile priests himself, Peter has dedicated his life to fighting those who would cover up the crimes of the Catholic Church. He's been closely following developments at the Australian Royal Commission, including the allegations against George Pell.
I've been to Australia and I've heard from people who have suffered directly. I think he is somebody who, understandably, victim survivors will have a huge issue with. I would go as far as to say that I consider him to be quite a dangerous individual.
Why is he dangerous?
I'm interested in supporting survivors and protecting children, and people who have covered up, people who have denied, people who have got their stories mixed up around these issues to do with survivors and child abuse. They, to me, represent a danger to the whole progress of child protection.
As head of Vatican finances, Cardinal George Pell is reckoned to be the second most powerful man in the Catholic Church. But no matter his extraordinary rise to power, the Cardinal cannot escape what happened in Ballarat decades ago. Allegations made at the Royal Commission that have not only shocked Australians, but struck at the very heart of the Vatican.
Today in Ballarat, he told the Royal Commission that in 1993 he called trusted priest George Pell to tell him about the abuse. His alleged response was, what would it take to keep him quiet?
The just tried to bribe me.
You offered him a bribe to shut up? I certainly offered nothing of the sort. Could I play you the tapes of his accusations? Yeah, sure.
Those startling allegations that George Pell tried to silence a child sex abuse victim were first made on 60 Minutes 13 years ago.
His response to that was, I want to know what it will take to keep you quiet.
David Ridsdale told Richard Carlton that he turned to Pell for help after being abused by his uncle, Father Gerald Ridsdale, who would later be exposed as Australia's worst pedophile priest.
You said, so it is alleged, I want to know what it would take to keep you quiet.
No, I certainly would never have said that, and I didn't say that.
George Pell later issued a sworn statement denying the bribery allegation. In 1993, after his conversation with David, And despite Gerald Ridsdale also being charged with abusing a number of other boys, George Pell still chose to publicly support him by accompanying Ridsdale to court, an act he now concedes might have been offensive.
To me, it's absolutely outrageous. And it demonstrates once again the callousness, the cold-heartedness, and the contempt that George Pell appears to display for this whole issue, and particularly for the victims of these dreadful crimes.
George Pell does say that he has great sympathy for the victims of sexual abuse.
I have seen in all the interviews, in all I've read, in all I've heard, I see not a shred of evidence that George Pell has any sympathy, empathy, or any kind of understanding or concern for victims and survivors of these crimes.
The Catholic Church has a terrible history of protecting abusers instead of protecting victims by moving pedophile priests from parish to parish. In the past fortnight, the Royal Commission has heard that George Pell, at the time a Ballarat priest, was at a meeting with Bishop Mulcairns in 1982. The minutes of that meeting record that Gerald Ridsdale needed to be moved.
Well, Ridsdale was moved 9 times within Victoria, but the minutes actually don't tell us why. Just that he had to be moved, but it doesn't say why. So is it fair then to say that the group of clergy, including George Pell, did not know that he was an abuser?
I think it's inconceivable that they would not have known.
Is it conceivable that nobody at that meeting asked why Ridsdale had to be moved? Because they already knew. They knew that he was an abuser.
To me, it seems highly likely that George Pell knew. And if he knew, and if the bishop knew, then these are people who should actually be facing criminal charges now, not just sanctions at the hands of the Pope or the Church or the attention of the media. These are people who have allegedly allowed the abuse of children to continue, sometimes for many years, and that is an unforgivable crime.
Gerald Ridsdale abused children in each of the 9 parishes he was moved to. George Pell has yet to fully answer the Royal Commission about what was discussed at the 1982 meeting. But to his critics, Cardinal Pell has already shown his disdain for victims and their families.
I feel as though we've been told to take the $50,000 and shut up.
When they spoke to Richard Carlton in 2002, Anthony and Chrissy Foster wanted their identities disguised. Their daughters, Emma and Katie, were repeatedly sexually abused by their school priest. But when the Fosters approached the then Archbishop of Melbourne, George Pell, seeking his compassion and understanding about their daughter's abuse, including Emma's subsequent suicide attempt, this is how he responded.
We showed Pell a photo of him presenting our daughter with a confirmation certificate at her confirmation. His response was, "That's a very nice photo, that's lovely," as if to say that's how we want the children coming out of the church. We then showed him a photo of our daughter just after she had cut her wrists with blood coming out of them. And his only comment, with absolutely no change in attitude, in facial expression, was, "Oh, she's changed, hasn't she?"
They're not a very happy family, are they, Archbishop?
No, they've suffered a lot.
Yeah, those photos he was talking about.
Yeah,
you've
good.
Probably seen.
Which is the...
That's the one, I think, of you confirming the less.
Yes.
And the other one is later.
I've never seen the photo...
with the slashed wrist.
With the slashed wrist.
So, an outright denial by George Pell that the Fosters showed him that photo. Emma has since taken her own life. Then, in 2013, at the Victorian inquiry into the handling of child sexual abuse, came this astonishing contradiction from the now Cardinal George Pell, that the Fosters did show him the photograph.
When Chrissy and Anthony Foster showed you a photograph after their daughter Emma had slashed her wrist, did you respond, and again I quote, she's changed, hasn't she?
Probably, but let's put this in context. Now, we know that was an attempted suicide. You've got to understand that this was production of this photo was something sudden. I didn't have a chance for a considered response. I fully understood the enormity of the suffering.
In 2002, George Pell told Richard Carlton the Fosters had never shown him the photograph. In 2013, he told the Victorian inquiry they did. For Peter Saunders, the Pope's special appointee to the Vatican Commission on Child Sex Abuse, the change in his story is shocking.
I've met the parents that we're talking about here, and for them to be treated in the way that they were treated and continue to be treated by George Pell and the Church, because that's who he represents, is absolutely appalling.
So in your opinion, in this case, Cardinal Pell was lying to Richard Carlton when he said he had never seen that photo before, or had he forgotten?
I think when you look at the photographs that we're discussing, and the parents of that child showed Cardinal Pell, George Pell, those photographs, they are not something that you would forget.
To consider how serious these renewed allegations are for George Pell, you need to understand the climate in which they're being heard. Here in Rome, Pope Francis recently made his strongest statement yet in his war against child sexual abuse, declaring that one priest abusing a minor was reason enough to move on the Church's whole structure, that one of his top lieutenants has been accused of supporting abusing priests and showing indifference at best to victims and their families seems to run counter to everything the Pope stands for.
My personal opinion is that he is making a mockery of the Papal Commission, of the Pope himself, but most of all of the victims and the survivors. And more importantly, I think anybody who is a serious obstacle to the work of the Commission and to the work of the Pope in trying to clean up the Church's act over this matter, I think they need to be taken aside very, very quickly and removed from any kind of position of influence.
George Pell has declined our request for an interview this past week, maintaining he'll return to Australia and face the Royal Commission if he's invited. But such is the concern within the Vatican at this widening scandal that Peter Saunders believes the Pope must act now.
I think, given the position of George Pell as a cardinal of the Church and a position of huge authority within the Vatican, I think he is a massive, massive thorn in the side of Pope Francis's papacy if he's allowed to remain. And I think it's critical that he is moved aside, that he is sent back to Australia, and that the Pope takes the strongest action against him.
And what if he doesn't?
Pope Francis is going to have to act, otherwise his prospect of greatness, I think, would be challenged.
Hello, I'm Tara Brown. Thanks for watching. To keep up with the latest from 60 Minutes Australia, make sure you subscribe to our channel. You can also download the 9Now app for full episodes and other exclusive 60 Minutes content.